Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much for asking me to present. Really excited to do that. Just a little bit of background about myself. My name is Dominique Delagnes, and I am the CEO at AverHealth. And I've been in the drug testing industry since 1998, so over 25 years. So, really, what I put together, I'm going to give a little bit of background about drugs, especially the fentanyls and the opiate category, and then I'm going to go into various strains of fentanyls and then talk through testing challenges. And then I have some more slides around some other drug trends if we have time as well. And then as I kind of complete each section, I'll certainly open it up for some questions and then be able to do some questions at the end. So thank you very much for having me. Really, if we think about it, if I was to take a poll in the room, what do you think the three most commonly used drugs in America were in 2022, 2023, 2024? And I want to shout some out that are there in the room. I guess you're all on mute, so I can't hear. So I'm going to
No,
keep going.
I'll translate. Alcohol.
Very good. So alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. So alcohol in the past month, 48% have consumed alcohol, with binge drinking being 21% of the population. Tobacco, 21% of individuals in the past year have used tobacco, and more than 1 in 5 people smoke cigarettes. There's certainly pocketed areas, so West Virginia, Missouri, Wyoming, Louisiana, and Arkansas. So it does vary the percentage depending on what state that you're in. And then 13% of the population have consumed marijuana in the past year. So here it gives you kind of different regions if you take a look at it. So if we look at the Mountain Pacific region, some of the areas that we see a ton are methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, and alprazolam. So if we jump into opiates, so unfortunately, we know that over 107,000 people have died in the United States in 2022 from the use of some sort of opioid out there. And unfortunately, 67% of those actually did involve some sort of synthetic opiate like fentanyl. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see kind of the graph of, as the years go up, more and more opiate drugs that we're seeing, and that really gets you to over the 107,000 going into 2022. In 2023, the overdose death rate topped over 112,000 in the 12 months period previous to that. And then once we get in the beginning of 2025, we'll be able to update these with 2024 statistics, but continue to see, unfortunately, that go up even throughout 2024. The other piece to think about, so when we look at drug testing, there are what they consider some sort of novel psychoactive substances, so new strains. So we're going to talk about in fentanyl. If you get a prescription for fentanyl, you would be prescribed fentanyl, which metabolizes into norfentanyl. But out in all these laboratories in Mexico, over in China and elsewhere that are manufacturing these drugs in some sort of small clandestine laboratory, it's not your fentanyl nor fentanyl, but it's some other strain of that. And so what this graph here is showing us is between 2018 and 2023, how many kind of new strains of drugs are out there. So you can see in the opioid family, there's 46 kind of new strains. In the stimulants, there's 31, and that would be your bath salt. So we know kind of in that bath salt class, as soon as labs start detecting for one bath salt, they're making another one. Benzos, even that, there's these new psychoactive substances being manufactured in other labs are coming over from Europe, not prescribed in the United States. Marijuana, that would be your K2, 44 different new strains. And then hallucinogens, there's 17 different ones, and then just kind of some miscellaneous. So, one of the things that we have to combat is what are those that are getting out into the street? And then as a lab, how do we detect them? So after we talk about fentanyls, I'm going to talk about how challenging it is for the laboratory for us to kind of pick up these new psychoactive substances out there as they're out there in the street. And then here's some positivity plots that we can see. So we have seen kind of over the years that heroin is going down, but it is being replaced by fentanyl. So the trajectory of the heroin going down, unfortunately, the fentanyl is going up faster than that. So there's a rise in cocaine Methamphetamines, we've seen a little bit of a decrease, depending on what part of the country that you're in, because really in 2022, 2023, there was some legislator that tried to stop the methamphetamines from coming across the border from Mexico. But fentanyl is definitely still making it and still on the rise there. And so, from a smuggling perspective, if we look at it, there are fewer pounds of drugs that are coming over because if you think about it, really before marijuana was actually legalized, the biggest thing that was coming across the border was um, was marijuana, which typically tended to be heavier and not as potent. Well, now, although there's not as many pounds coming across, it is much more potent drugs. So if you look at the graph on the right hand side, you can see kind of the rise of the fentanyl, the heroin, and other drugs. So in 2022, there was 14,000 pounds of fentanyl seized, but in 2023 there was 26,000, so almost double the amount that's coming across. And so that's one of the bigger drugs that unfortunately are making it across our border. So if we jump into fentanyl, and this is going to, talk about what is fentanyl. It's basically in the opiate family, so similar to what we consider the effects um, of heroin, but certainly more potent. It was originally developed as breakthrough pain, and it is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. And then as we go through this, one of the things we're going to take a look at is half life. And the reason why half life is important, it's important for the laboratories because depending upon what that half life is, that's how long that window of detection is. So the shorter the half life, the shorter it's getting out of your body, and the shorter it's going to stay in substances like oral fluid and urine that we're detecting at the laboratory. So when it's prescribed legally, in oral doses, it's anywhere from 100 to 160 micrograms for kind of that breakthrough pain that I talked about. It's also available in a patch form and injections, and there is a nasal spray as well. So if you look at the picture on the right hand side, you can see the potency difference. So if you look at the powder of how much heroin, that's typically what you would need for an overdose death, where in fentanyl you need much less of it because of just how potent it is. When somebody is overdosing on fentanyl, they're going to have severe respiratory depression, muscle rigidity, potentially seizures, hypotension, and slip into a coma. When we look at different data, we'll see fatal overdoses where fentanyl is anywhere from about 3 to 28 nanograms, with an average being 8.3. And this was our toxicologist that looked at some cases back from 2022. And then urine levels, we saw levels anywhere from 5 to 93 nanograms per milliliter, with the average being 28. Really, what happened is in 2005, we started to see fentanyl laced heroin. And the reason was because of how potent it is. You need less of it, so it's cheaper to produce. And also, it was almost like a marketing where look at how much more potent this heroin is um, that ended up in the supply, and it allowed it to be stretched out because of how much more potent fentanyl is. Originally, it was attributed to one lab in Mexico, but obviously we know it's being manufactured all over the place today. So fentanyl, it's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable for dealers. And according to the DEA, criminal drug networks are mass producing fentanyl pills as well and marketing them as legitimate pills, such as they may say that it's Vicodin or some other kind of opiate that would be prescribed. The counterfeit pills are fake medication, and they have all kinds of different ingredients. Some may have, some inactive ingredients along with, unfortunately, that active ingredient, which is fentanyl, what's in there. So here we can see pictures of that. So on the left-hand side of the screen, this would be an authentic from a when you're prescribed and you actually get it, from a legitimate pharmacy. That's what it looks like, and the counterfeits look very, very, very similar. Especially, you can imagine if these have been handled or whatever, the stamp may come off a little bit, but to the common person, when they're purchasing this drug off the street, they have no idea, are they purchasing legitimate oxycodone, or is it some sort of uh, counterfeit oxycodone, and they really can't tell the difference between the pills. And unfortunately, we also know that we've started seeing rainbow fentanyl, that the intent is to be manufactured in the bright, pretty colors that is looking to attract kids and young adults. So we know that there's all different of these analogs that are out there in the street. And we're going to talk about some of the different ones that we know that are out there. And so, from a testing perspective, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So, if you do a laboratory screen, so that immunoassay screen test, right, it comes back positive for fentanyl, and you end up doing a confirmation test, typically depending upon what your lab's doing, if they're just looking for fentanyl, norfentanyl, and it's any of these other ones, they're going to report that back as negative to you. So we as labs have to develop a method. And so in that method, we have to look for that structure of the specific variant that's out there. So I know for us at the moment, we have 16 different analogs in our confirmation method for fentanyl because we know all this stuff that's being made on the street frequently is not going to be fentanyl nor fentanyl, but it's one of these other ones. So carfentanil is one that we're seeing out there. Its trade name is Wild Nil. It's been around since 1975, but the intent was it was a tranquilizer for deer, elk, moose, or other large animals. The data that we know about is the half-life, how long does it last in goats, because that's all that studies have been done. And that's the other really challenge of these drugs is the fact that that they're so potent. It's not like we're going to do any kind of studies to understand how they affect individuals. But in a goat, the half-life is 3 to 20 hours, and then you can see that the various peak levels of the amount that would get in there. And then I always, show this as kind of a fun fact. Hopefully, many of you have actually seen the Jurassic Park movie. And there's a scene in The Lost World where they talk about giving a T Rex 10 milligrams of carfentanil. So, from a movie trivia perspective, is that the right amount? Well, if we look at it, a T Rex is about the size of an African elephant, and the dosage really should be anywhere from a half to 1 milligram, not 10 milligrams. So if you want to give all your friends some fun facts, the reference that they made of how much carfentanil they gave to the T Rex was off. It was at about 10 times more than it should have been. There has been use of carfentanil back in 2002. There was 40 to 50 armed Chechen terrorists seized a theater in Moscow. And so they held 850 people hostage in there. The Russian Federal Security Services forces pumped in some sort of substance within there. And unfortunately, 130 people ending up dying due to what was pumped in there. And we're pretty sure that what was pumped in there was carfentanil, and they didn't appreciate the fact that it was going to be so potent that it would have caused individuals to die. One survivor had zero point 0.1 nanograms of carfentanil 5 days post exposure, and both carfentanil and remifentanil were found on clothing of another. So that's what they believe was put in there. Alpha methylfentanyl is another one. It's called China White. It's been around since 1979. It does have similar side effects to other fentanyls, and it's about 10 times more potent than fentanyl itself. Acetylfentanyl, we've seen an increase since 2013, and it's 15 times more potent than morphine. Alfentanyl is another one that's been around since 1980, and it's roughly similar to morphine in potency. It is faster acting, so it has that short half-life, so your window detection is going to be shorter. Sufentanil has been around since 1976, and it's 5 to 10 times more potent than fentanyl and 500 to 800 times more potent than morphine. And then remifentanil has been around since 1996. It's very fast acting with a half-life of minutes instead of hours. Butyrylfentanyl we've seen since 2012, and its effects last 1 to 4 hours. And then fentanyl is another one that we've seen since 2014, and its effects last from about 1 to 3 hours. So those are different strands that we know that are being manufactured out in these clandestine laboratories that then become very difficult. So often what happens is these chemists are making so much money making these drugs and selling them that once they realize what different laboratories are testing for, they'll just change that molecular structure just a little bit. And so then labs are no longer detecting that specific drug. So, really, all major drugs now have a synthetic version, which I showed you in the beginning of that chart. The majority really started coming over from China. People purchased them over the internet, and they would actually just arrive through FedEx or UPS in packages and get shipped to individuals. So typically, those drugs start to be seen in Europe first, and they make it into the US about 6 months later. Typically, the Western governments will complain to the Chinese government that, hey, these are being manufactured. They shut down those labs. And as I indicated, um, they're making so much money, they'll just go ahead and open up another lab with a different formula and keep doing it. The other thing is really, as we've legalized marijuana, we know that the cartel needed to make money doing something else. So we've started to see a lot of the drugs come over from Mexico. It's a lot easier to get into the United States. And so unfortunately, that's what's making it across our border since marijuana has been legalized in the United States. And then even in India, we're starting to see emerging source that has providing the powders of fentanyl. So if we look at a couple of different cases, here's an individual. So how do we figure out what somebody has ingested? So here's one where the subject uses heroin and collapses and unfortunately ends up dying. And so after testing those, we see that morphine only had 18 nanograms. There was no 6-MAM in there. So that's really what heroin is. But there were 12 nanograms of fentanyl. So that's really what caused that individual to have that fatality or that overdose death. So, how do we learn what's in somebody's body? So, we know that the powders, the pills are seized by law enforcement and testing will occur to figure out kind of what that structure is. So, the structure gets identified by that crime lab through doing some testing through LCMS or GCMS. There's also some internet sources that often you can hear about what drugs may be out on the street. Unfortunately, emergency rooms start seeing admissions for individuals who come in there, and that can kind of first allow us to find out that initial toxicity data or toxicology data of what's in there. So as soon as we know what it is, drug standards can get made, and then laboratories can start to develop those methods to be able to detect for it. In Europe, the other thing that they do at major sporting events and concerts is they'll actually pull the toilet water from there and see what's in there as well. So as these start to get developed, we know that the authorities are going to crack down on that specific drug. Unfortunately, then what happens is these laboratories that are making these just tweak that structure a little bit. So now instead of looking like carfentanil looks like remifentanil, right? So we need to know what's out there, what's being developed. The new drugs get found on the street in those pills, liquids, and powders. You start to see the overdose deaths and the emergency room admissions. They hit the news. Vendors make that reference standard. We're going to develop that test, and then we can do some research on it and scientific data gets published about it, and then hopefully legislation controls that substance. But then we're kind of on this forever treadmill of different strands and different drugs making it in that have a different chemical structure. So the laboratories typically stay 6 months to a year behind what's making it out on the street for that time to understand what's out there, get the standard, and develop the method for it. So initially, really, there's no reference standards. We don't know the metabolism. So one, how long is it going to? How long will it last in the body? How can we detect it? What cutoff do we need? What's the half life? Can it be detected in a screening level? So if I'm screening for fentanyl, can I detect it as a screen? Do I need to go straight to LCMS to pick it up? And then where to look for it? So certainly for labs to develop these, there are challenges, and it just takes time to do that, which is why we're often 6 months to a year behind when the drugs actually hit the streets. I'm going to stop there and take any questions about that. And then I have some slides kind of on other emerging drugs that are out there.
Thank you, Dominique. And just so you know, you are right up against our lunchtime. So
Okay.
that may be why you
I'm
don't
sure that's much more important than me talking.
get full participation. Questions for Dominique? How much would it cost to develop a 46 panel test to detect every type of fentanyl?
That's a great question. I can't answer that off of the top of my head because each of those standards that we talked about have a cost associated with them. I've seen those standards cost anywhere from, $100 to $500. I don't know all of them off the top of my head. And so then they all need to get into, a drug standard to detect it, but definitely on the pricey side. Now, granted, when I develop that, I can use that material over multiple batches. Um, but I don't know the exact figure.
I have a question for you.
Mhm.
The efficacy of naloxone with these different strands, is it still the same? Or is it changing because of that?
So naloxone will reverse that. It will vary, which drug we're talking about and what the potency is, and a lot of them are being manufactured in these labs with there's no quality control. So batches from one to the next can vary a little bit. You may need more though. So sometimes it may, instead of just one. Sorry. I was thinking Narcan, and you asked me about naloxone. I apologize, but I'll finish my thought on Narcan, which is what I was.
Because I meant Narcan and not naloxone. So good, we're both messing up. Perfect.
I was reading your mind. Um, it may take more than one dose to reverse it.
Let's talk emerging concerns, Dominique.
Okay. Are you okay for me to keep going if we're right on your lunch hour? So speedball. Unfortunately, we're starting to see both heroin and or morphine and cocaine mixed together, even fentanyl and amphetamines. So what's happening by mixing the two is the stimulant obviously is going to raise their pulse, but then the whatever the opiate kind of slows it down. So often it will allow that high that they get to be extended out. But the other thing is they may also experience some sort of delayed overdose. Um, I'm not going to play that, but everybody knows xylazine or trank that's out there. So we know obviously it has definitely, unfortunately, hit the streets. The good news about xylazine is it is typically combined with either your opiate or fentanyl. So as long as you're testing for the opiate or fentanyl, you're still going to pick it up. It was a unscheduled veterinarian drug that was very easy to be able to get off the street. It does cause kind of open sores on individuals often, and we first detected it in 2019, and we know now it's really made it across the entire United States. The unfortunate part we were talking about Narcan is Narcan does not work to counteract the effects of xylazine. And then we're seeing not only xylazine, but other nitazines out there. So there's other strands of different nitazines that are being manufactured, not just xylazine itself. So we're starting to look to see what those are and to look and broaden our nitazine kind of test panel to detect others. Another is ISO, is found out there quite a bit. It's a white powder. In 2019, it first was in the Midwest, but it has moved kind of across both coasts and down to the south. It does present, as I indicated, a powder. It is similar to fentanyl, and it often is mixed with heroin and other drugs. And it can be found in counterfeit Xanax pills, or other those opiate pills. Narcan does counteract if somebody does use ISO. We're also seeing an increase in gabapentin. And so the reason why individuals are taking gabapentin is when you mix gabapentin with the other drug that they're taking, is it's going to really increase the high that they have. So there are legitimate reasons that somebody may be prescribed gabapentin for seizures, restless leg syndrome, shingles, and diabetic nerve pain, and also for alcohol withdrawal, sleep disorder, and some other medical conditions. But the number of prescriptions out there, and really even in our positivity rate, we're definitely seeing an increase of people purchasing off the street to be able to mix it with other drugs and extend that high out. Tianeptine, also known as gas station heroin, because often it is something that has, at this point in time, it is not considered an illegal drug. So it's found in many product that you can purchase in gas station, hence the name of gas station heroin. It's an antidepressant. Um, we started to see it in 2018, and not all states, as I indicated, are considering it to be a banned substance, but more and more are starting to do that. Ketamine, another animal tranquilizer. Obviously, it became pretty popular because Matthew Perry, unfortunately, was one of the drugs in his system that we know that was used. It is intended, like I said, for it to be an animal tranquilizer, and individuals are starting to use that quite a bit. And then methamphetamine. So we showed that there was a little bit of a decrease in methamphetamine, and it's really because in 2022 there was a huge effort to stop the methamphetamine coming across the borders, and so we saw that go down. But unfortunately, what we know is that fentanyl was coming across the border instead of that. And then over the counter, so we talked about there's all kinds of different benzodiazepines that people are ordering off the internet or are being manufactured somewhere else that are not legal in the United States. The synthetic, so your synthetic cannabinoids started seeing around 2000. There's over 25 different chemical families and over 400 different compounds and counting. Obviously, it has similar effects to marijuana, but it typically will last a little bit longer. And then your synthetic stimulants, so your bath salts, and it's supposed to give you kind of that high, like an ecstasy. So all different strands are being manufactured and changed all the time as well. And then kratom, as it's been cracked down and made illegal, we in so many different states we don't see it as much, but definitely very easy to order over the internet and to get shipped here. And then in states where marijuana is not legal, so not really applicable to you, but in other states, lots of other variants of THC that go into vape pens can be also sold in like gas stations. There are different variants that are not illegal yet that are marketed towards teen and young adults. And then psychoactive drugs, we are seeing a rise in that as well. Both the number of different strands that are out there, but also the individuals that are using it. So 8% of young adults have reported using some sort of hallucinogen, and unfortunately, the amount of adults has doubled from 2021 to 2022. So that is a very, very quick overview. Thank you for listening to me of just kind of some other drugs that we know that are making it out in the streets and becoming popular.